I was recently leafing through a video gaming magazine from 1994, and I came across an advertisement for Double Dragon 5: The Shadow Falls. This ad tries to creep us out with a very evil Shadow Master, but more notably, it prompts that the game would release on August 5th, 1994. Being August now, that put Double Dragon 5 back on my brain. If you followed me for some time, you know I've played the Super Nintendo version of The Shadow Falls multiple times on my Twitch channel. We killed our brother. It's okay. Billy's actually okay. It's even one of the games for which I do meme speedruns. Now, I'll sound like a broken record here because I've said this about dozens of other fighting games, but I don't believe Double Dragon 5: The Shadow Falls is as bad as the internet consensus claims. This will stray from our main topic just a little, but here's a little bit of personal backstory for you. I used to rent games constantly, and when you did, it was a flip of the coin on whether or not you got the instruction booklet to look at with the game. Perhaps it was fate that my local rental location offered the book for Double Dragon 5. It's likely way harder to come by these days, but the instruction booklet for Double Dragon 5: The Shadow Falls is seriously awesome. It's obvious to everyone The Shadow Falls is based on the syndicated cartoon show that ran for 2 seasons through 1994. The instruction book for the game takes these characters and puts them in comics to run you through all of the game's features and controls. While some of the character poses are a little funky, overall these comics are pretty cool, and in reading through the book like you would a comic, the reader seamlessly flows through even the most mundane of game information compared to the typically bland paragraphs of text. Now, in this instruction booklet, the characters are detailed in information files similar to how they are in the game itself. However, these character features only share one of each character's special moves. This left the players to discover the special moves for themselves, or send them to magazines or game guides. Yes, there is an official strategy guide to Double Dragon 5: The Shadow Falls, published by Brady Games. It actually looks kind of interesting, with secret codes, information on the game endings, behind-the-scenes materials on the cartoon and movie, and an interview with the creators of Double Dragon 5? Man, maybe I should really get this thing. But I don't think I'll be spending 10 times the cover price for this guide anytime soon. I suppose I'll just stick with my totally unauthorized SEGA Games guide by Brady Games. It's a bare-bones section that gives the full special moves lists, but this guide also gives me sections on Eternal Champions and Balls 3D! This game released during a time where I still produced handmade fanzines that were maybe only ever seen by 2 other friends, but I jumped on being able to fill in these untold special moves as a scoop for my latest fanzine. This specific guide was lost to time, but I was able to hang on to a couple of guides I made in the past, such as having maps from Dragon Warrior. However, I still clearly remember the fun I had labbing out the hidden moves in Double Dragon 5: The Shadow Falls, and it's one of those things that left me with a positive gaming memory. That was a really indirect and long-winded way to say I have a soft spot for Double Dragon 5 on Super Nintendo, and I actually enjoy the game. But when it came to seeing the advertisement, I had the revelation that I had never played the SEGA Genesis version of the game. So, for the 29th release date anniversary of Double Dragon 5: The Shadow Falls, I fired up the SEGA version in my emulator. I fully expected there would be differences in graphics and sound, but I was not prepared for the gameplay secret that I would discover. Again, I do very casual speedruns of the Super Nintendo version of the game, so I thought I would be cheeky and jump into CPU battles with the very aggressive Jimmy Lee strategies. There seemed to be something off about the gameplay, as the computer would land counter hits at the weirdest times. After a little bit of experimentation, that's when it hit me. In the SEGA Genesis version of Double Dragon 5: The Shadow Falls, I could cancel my block stun at any time with any move. If you don't follow fighting games, to break this down, normally when you block an attack in a fighting game, there is a set time where your character is locked into a blocking animation, and you cannot act again with an attack or movement until this time has elapsed. This remains true in the Super Nintendo version of Double Dragon 5. However, for whatever reason, you can instantly counterattack the very second you block an attack in the SEGA Genesis version. This began making sense as to why I was being punished for my aggressive gameplay against the computer. It was canceling its block stun to instantly pop me while my character was still executing the attacks. In the case of Jimmy Lee, this is repeating his late jumping heavy punch into crouching heavy punch. And by the way, in the Super Nintendo version, this is a 3-hit re-dizzy combo, but just note that the jumping heavy punch has to hit super deep in order to combo. Because Jimmy Lee's crouching heavy punch sticks him in a longer animation where he swipes his sword twice, the computer canceling its block stun allowed it to counterattack before Jimmy could even complete his attack. This absolutely fascinated me and took me back to the lab. What dirty attacks are in this game that could fully punish the CPU using this tech? For now, I'm settling on Jawbreaker's crouching heavy punch, the tongue attack. This attack from Jawbreaker gives you fantastic range and decent power while also providing some alright stun. Combined with block stun canceling, this gives the move a little extra grime. At a sweep distance, you can even block a projectile and get a ranged hit after canceling into the tongue. This largely makes Jawbreaker unstoppable against the CPU, barring a few instances where special moves from characters like Sickle make multiple hits very quickly. Since Sickle's Saw Blade hits so fast in succession, he'll get in a hit before Jawbreaker can execute the crouching heavy punch. Huh. Does this shoot someone like Sickle up the Double Dragon 5 The Shadow Falls for SEGA Genesis tier list? And while you'll have to tighten up your gameplay a little bit, this strategy will also let you cruise through the pro difficulty mode. That way you can be rewarded with a nightmare fuel ending. I play a lot of WWF WrestleMania the arcade game, so I'm well used to games playing extremely differently between the Super Nintendo and SEGA Genesis formats. Still, I guess I wasn't prepared for what was waiting for me in the SEGA Genesis version of Double Dragon 5. I love grimy tactics you can use to torment the CPU, and I suppose this creates an entirely different speedrun between the two formats. The real question that remains is how this plays into the two-player versus matches. After my experience, I would stick with the Super Nintendo version of Double Dragon 5 as the better game compared to the SEGA Genesis, but I love that I can enjoy the SEGA Genesis version in a completely different way. That kicks 2 of the 3 versions of Double Dragon 5 The Shadow Falls off my list. If 2023 marks the 29th anniversary of this game, that means that next year will be its 30th anniversary. I realize the 3rd version released later than on the Super Nintendo and SEGA Genesis, but I suppose that leaves one more stone I can unturn next year.